This week, Paul and I discussed the one language to rule them all. Yes, JavaScript. In the news, Beep for local privilege escalation, developers leverage third-party libraries instead of built-in functionality, and Intel admits a load of its CPUs have a Spectre variant that can't be fixed. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library, on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for teams by visiting itpro.tv/Security Weekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30.
Welcome everyone to episode 11, our 12th episode of Application Security Weekly. I am of course your host, Keith Hoodlett, and I'm excited to be joined by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
What's going on, Keith? Always excited to do the still kind of shiny new Application Security Weekly. I'm excited with the way it's been going and the stories we're talking about and the response from the audience. So this is a wonderful welcome addition to my Friday mornings.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far, and quite frankly, the news this week has been really exciting. As you could probably hear, I've got a new audio setup. Thank you to Apollo Clark for sending over some suggestions on how to get this all set up. And
yeah, what is that? What is that microphone?
This is an Audio-Technica USB 2020,
yeah,
or something like that.
I've heard of those before. Yeah, it's pretty good. You sound pretty good. So,
thank you. Yeah, it's much better than the Blue Yeti that I bought. So, needless to say, this thing is a major upgrade.
Nice.
So, many thanks to Apollo Clark for that. It is hopefully going to make the rest of our audience enjoyment that much better. So, a couple of quick announcements, Paul, that I want to cover at least in this segment. Is first, go to itpro.tv/securityweekly and use the code SECWeekly30 to try a free 7-day trial and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. So to that end, I've definitely been checking it out for some of the development stuff that they're adding. Paul, I know that you've probably jumped on there a bunch of times for some different things. Any recent stuff that you're watching over at IT Pro TV?
Not currently, although some of my projects will probably forced me to go watch some of those training videos. My current project, and while security related, I actually have a almost like non-security use case, but I'm going to take advantage of the security aspects of it. So I've been playing around with OSSec, and I put one agent on one Windows box here in the studio, and I've got that now successfully. I actually checked the logs this morning. They are successfully reporting to the Security Onion, which runs OSSec, that allows you to use the Elk stack with Kibana as your front end. I search for that IP address, and I can actually see Windows events. Now, I have to tune it a little more because my goal is to, inherently it lets me look at primarily like Windows logon success and failures, which I thought was pretty cool from a security perspective. Also, I want to tune it so that I want to try and see if it's possible to configure OSSec to pull CPU utilization, memory utilization,
right,
and CPU temperature, because that one system's been giving us issues. And then if that works, I want to roll it out to the rest of the production systems, not only monitoring for security, but also monitoring for some of the environmental factors that tend to be an issue, especially as the warmer months are coming, not soon enough.
Yeah, right. I mean, I see you're wearing a hat. I almost always wear a hat on this show, so it's no surprise there. But yeah, it has definitely been cold up here in the Northeast, unseasonably cold in my experience. Hopefully by the time May comes around, it'll be warm, because we also have Source Boston coming up May 9th through the 10th. Go to sourceconference.com and register using the code
you weren't
SW75.
On the show last night. We interviewed Masha Sadova, and I was thinking about it last night after a couple of glasses of bourbon. I think I said her name is Masha Sedona in the later segment, and I'm like, wait a minute, that wasn't right. But she was awesome. She came on the show last night, as well as Catherine Teitler from Misty. So it was a good show. Last time we talked about InfoSec World and interviewed a Source Boston keynote speaker. Masha's given the Thursday morning keynote at Source Boston this year. So not to be missed. Awesome. She was an awesome speaker. Very smart, very energetic. So yeah, I can see why Rob had selected her for giving the keynote. So if you're not going to Source Boston, you should and enjoy some of those activities, including some awesome keynotes. So.
And we have a $75 off discount code. It's Security Weekly 75 Whiskey Mike Kilo Whiskey. So SW75 WMKW. Definitely go check it out. I'm going to be there, Paul. I imagine you guys are going to be there as well.
We will. Yeah, we'll be in the vendor area. I'll be giving a talk, which just got, did I tell you this? It got really interesting. We had a security event on one of our Docker instances in the cloud.
Really?
Yeah. And actually, I've never done forensics in this capacity, and I haven't delved into it. And so I'm talking about open source technologies for security monitoring, which obviously I haven't implemented because we had a security event. We basically ripped down some infrastructure, saved everything off, and like rebuilt the infrastructure, and are very heavily IP filtering now. So, but the existing infrastructure, I'm excited because our sponsor, Layered Insight, is going to help us not only configure their tool, which is a day late and $1 short, and that's totally my fault, but also I'm hoping for some help in the forensics aspect, as that's what they do, is container security. So I'm hoping to rely on their expertise. In talking with them, I believe they have done some forensic investigations in this capacity, and I think that's going to make awesome content for both the shows and my talk. So I'm always everyone's like, we had a security incident. Like, I think they expect me to be upset. Like, I'm excited. I'm like, that's awesome. It gives us stuff to talk about. And of course, no one's data, no one's data was harmed. And we did, pull the infrastructure down, rekey everything, redo everything, and apply additional security controls. And we're working on the investigation. And we're always very transparent with our listeners. Anytime we have a security event, we talk about it on the show, because no one is spared from security events. And we don't want to be like Panera and just deny it, because that's bad.
That's a whole other story that I actually actively tried to avoid this week, because it's such a train wreck. But maybe we'll talk about it in the news segment. So far, though, I definitely wanted to talk about the one language to rule them all, which in this case, some people are going to argue, they're going to be like, no, it's straight C or bust. But arguably, Node.js, which is effectively, as some people would think of it from a programming standpoint, kind of like an interpreter for JavaScript on the server and a number of other things, allows for this JavaScript ecosystem to go well beyond the ideas of, hey, you're building a website, throw some JavaScript up on the front end and it looks pretty and it actually interacts very nicely. It has got to the point now with Node that effectively everything that you would want to build, anywhere you want to build it, can be built today in JavaScript. That's not to say that that's the best tool for the job.
Yeah, that's not to say you should. Certainly
is a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
Right. But believe it or not, though, a lot of things have been built with JavaScript today that some people don't even really realize has been built with JavaScript. So I wanted to just cover a couple of the domains that Node.js has successfully allowed for JavaScript to take over, some more efficiently or effectively than others. And so hopefully throughout that, Paul, you'll have some insight. Obviously, the web is kind of the first place where JavaScript has really taken over. React, Angular, Vue, anything else that's a front-end JavaScript framework has just taken off in the last few years.
Keith, so. I want to make the distinction from both a security perspective and application development perspective, that you don't have to be 100% Node.js and using these technologies. You can, from what I've observed, kind of like add them on to your project. So if your backend is in Java or your backend in Python, like we have with Flask in your project and my project respectively, you can like go add a Node.js component to that and have that handle the front end user interaction, correct? Or the backend. I mean, either one.
Yeah.
But I think you can pretty easily add that on to your existing projects, correct?
Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of organizations today are using it for front end development. So to the extent that a good example is with Flask and Vue. I've seen a number of different kind of guides and walkthroughs on using Vue.js, which is all of your front end management of the single page application effect that you get. Then run on the back end for all of the logic, all of the password hashing and checking, etc. in Python Flask. So you can take frameworks from React to Angular to Vue and stick them right onto the front end to whatever you're already using today, right? You don't have to use, Python. Like, for example, really good example here. The InfoSec Mentors project is almost entirely just Python Flask. And I really, really should be touching up the front end because it's very simple right now. And it could use a makeover in probably Vue.js, which is what I'll end up using.
And that's kind of my assessment too, Keith, is the front end capacity that Python Flask gives you is somewhat limiting. And adding on these other JavaScript frameworks is probably the way to go, and we probably need to do that for both of our respective applications. So,
and I would actually, it's funny because I've played with React, I've played with AngularJS and Angular 2, as well as Vue.js, which is kind of like the new kid on the block. And I gotta say, writing Vue.js has been simple and elegant. My own website, attackdriven.io, which is somewhat simple right now. It's kind of like a resume site, for lack of a better term. Is all written in Vue.js, and it uses an Nginx backend for the web server. So I loved it because it was both mobile friendly and desktop friendly from a development standpoint. Again, props to Apollo Clark for saying, make sure you can fit it inside a bag first, i.e. build mobile first, and then expand it to desktop, because it's hard to shrink things as opposed to expand them from a display and a user interaction standpoint. So I personally love Vue.js. If you're looking at new development frameworks for the front end, Vue is really easy and fun to develop in. And IT Pro TV has an entire course in it, so go check that out as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, I want to ask you, Keith, about the Node operating system. How does that work?
That's something that I thought was pretty crazy, and I just stumbled upon myself. It actually is using the Linux kernel to do some of the more efficient, like underlying calls to the hardware, but it's all otherwise run on the Node runtime. So there's no bash actually involved in the operating system itself.
That's so weird.
Now it's a matter of...
So weird.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like, it's crazy that
I kind of had the same feeling when I dabbled very, very short time frame with CoreOS. Right, for running containers, and it was like not Linux enough for me. And I was like, wow, it's way too much of a learning curve. And now you see this NodeOS, and there is no shell, essentially, like no bash there, which I think we're going to start seeing trends, moving towards those leaner, purpose-built operating systems. I don't think they'll be completely ubiquitous, but in application development, I think we're going to start seeing this as a trend emerge in the next year or so.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, Solomon Hike, who's the founder and former CEO, I think he recently departed Docker, recently was sharing a talk where someone was doing like a Linux kit work with containers, where they were effectively building the entire operating system on the fly using containers. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I think there's like CubeOS or Cubes or something like that. That does similar kind of like containerized operating system functionality for like different applications that you install. And from my understanding, NodeOS is somewhat the same, except that in this case, the package manager is actually NPM as opposed to, apt, as you might get on like a Ubuntu system, for example. So I thought that was just crazy. But also, I remember a few years ago, I was speaking with a student at University of New Hampshire who was talking about some theoretical work that was being done on optimization of operating systems. And it was theorized, it hadn't actually been proven out at the time, but it was theorized that an application, or rather I should say an operating system written entirely in JavaScript would actually be 2 or 3% more efficient in terms of compute speed, time, system
Hmm.
utilization than modern operating systems, which kind of blew my mind. And I was like, yeah, no, never going to happen. At the time, Node really wasn't as mature as I think it is today, and it's only a few years on. But to that end, it was kind of like, yeah, never going to happen. And now I'm looking at NodeOS, and I'm like, maybe it is happening. Like maybe like the world is just changing under my feet, and I don't even know it yet.
Yeah, and I think
So
that,
yeah,
as from an attacker standpoint, your landscape is changing now, and it's best to try and stay ahead of that, because your traditional attacks, such as command execution, are going to have to completely change. Like, and certainly your payloads, but also some of the attacks you might perform just don't even apply because there's no traditional operating system underneath the covers. I think we've already started to see that with Docker. Of course, we've observed that some of the attacks have morphed and changed into something completely new, and I'm anxious to report on that, certainly. But as an attacker, you should be paying attention to these technologies and adjusting your toolkits, which is exciting. I think we're going to see a whole new slew of attack methodologies and attack tools, which is awesome.
yeah, and to that end as well, what's interesting though is you run into problems with the way that Node was built that lead to also all sorts of other security issues that I imagine will start popping out. For example, I think it was about a year ago, maybe closer to 8 months ago, there was a news article that showed that Node was taking 64-bit float numbers and packaging them or compressing them down into 53-bit. So from a compression and optimization standpoint, maybe good, but from a precision standpoint, really bad. And when you start thinking about encryption, for example, right? Precision is somewhat important, but also to the extent that it has to be optimized to use as many bits as possible for optimal encryption to take place. Truncating things in that way is just all bad. And so I think that you're right, Paul. Definitely the attack vectors are going to change, but at the same time, I think what's going to start happening now is people are going to start taking a deeper look at Node as an ecosystem and realizing that, for example, on the desktop, if you're running Slack today, you're running Node in the background to actually run Slack because it's written with Electron, which is all running on Node. So if you suddenly have a Node server, and I think actually you covered this on Security Weekly.
We did. There was
close to about a year ago.
Moses, SANS instructor that presented on attacking client-side Node applications. Yeah.
Moses Hernandez is who we're referring to there specifically. So that was an excellent episode. I don't recall the number that it was, but it definitely was an eye-opening episode because, yeah, if you're running a whole lot of different applications today, you actually end up running them in Node to some degree or another. So to that end, Node is somewhat taken over the desktop, right? Like suddenly you write an application in Electron, which was developed by GitHub, and you can run it on Mac, Linux, or Windows natively, right? You don't have to worry about
it's the new Java.
Right? Well, it's the new Java, but it's also, in my opinion, faster and more lightweight. Like you look at
you don't want to run Java on the client. We established that in like 1999. So
over 3 billion devices are running Java. Paul.
Right. Yeah.
Like heaven help us. But to that end, like if you're running VS Code, for example, VS Code is Electron based. So I don't know, personally, like I've run with PyCharm, WebStorm, I've run on Atom and others, and I found that VS Code is snappy and it's lightweight and powerful, right? Like it can do a lot on very few resources. And so to that end, the efficiency game is, win right there. But it's amazing to me to think that so much is coming back to a language that was written in 10 days. JavaScript, the first ECMAScript, as it was actually called, they used the term or the name or moniker of JavaScript to ride the coattails of Java during the .com boom. And so it's actually like the real name for JavaScript is actually ECMAScript. And I think we're up to number 6 or 7 at this point. But sometimes you'll hear it as like ES6 or ES7 as the abbreviation, and everyone else just calls it JavaScript because that was the moniker that they were using. It's also taken over the mobile space though, Paul. Like, so React, we were talking about a little bit earlier from the desktop environment, just stick it on top of whatever you're running on the back end and you're good to go. You can actually write mobile cross-platform applications using React Native, which gives you compilable applications to run on your iOS or Android device. which also kind of blows my mind because JavaScript on the phone, like, sure, you're running in your browser, okay, but as an actual native application, I don't know, Paul. What do you think about that? That's you've seen just as I have, but you've seen the rise of mobile devices and played in a lot of different sandboxes when it comes to iOS or Android. What are your thoughts there?
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
At least he's honest.
I think there's just too much stuff going on my laptop. So, what was the question?
It's okay.
Sorry.
So, JavaScript as compilable applications on mobile devices. So you've run, I think you're on a Google Pixel at this point, if I've been following along on the shows correctly. But you've also used iOS devices. I find it kind of mind blowing that you can write an entire application for 2 different operating systems for the mobile environment and have it run just seamlessly. That kind of blows my mind, especially given how disparate or how problematic the Google ecosystem has been for security purposes. And yet those applications are able to make it into the iOS kind of walled garden without issue. Maybe writing in React Native is a more secure approach. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was just kind of mulling in my brain. Like, I know that an Android, for example, is really easy to hijack packages and execute code. Hence, there's always a news story every week about some malicious Android app. To the point where I stopped covering it because it's just not even news anymore. One could hope that JavaScript provides a better framework for developing more secure mobile applications, but it very likely could be that attackers just haven't taken notice because it's not as ubiquitous as native Android apps or native iOS apps. So, yeah, I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those situations where the future attack surface is probably also going to be both related to JavaScript applications, but also leveraging JavaScript as the attack surface. Monero is, as far as I understand, for the mining tool that goes onto your website is JavaScript based. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you're making system level calls with JavaScript kind of scares me a little bit. It does. A lot, actually, quite frankly. But that's the world we live in. And speaking of earlier, we talked about backend servers. The whole idea of Node, or the whole purpose of Node, was actually to be able to run JavaScript on the backend. So there is a number of different ways to do this. Express.js is kind of the big one. But you can run a JavaScript application as full stack. I mean, you can run it presentation layer all the way down to the actual web server at this point, which, I don't know, Paul, did you ever think, especially for both you and I going through the .com boom and thus, that we would ever see JavaScript running back end, let alone as much of the front end as it is?
Yeah, it certainly shocked me how much JavaScript has grown over the years. And I hate coding in JavaScript. I guess I got to get over that.
So, honestly, I think that the reason that it's probably so popular is because so many people come from tightly managed languages. Even C or C++ will you do certain things that maybe you shouldn't be doing, but you still have to follow some sort of form, or you have to write it in such a way that the compiler will let you compile, right? And JavaScript is the Wild West of languages. You can do all sorts of crazy things that you probably shouldn't be able to do if it were any other language. And I think that's quite frankly why it has so quickly taken over the ecosystem landscapes of mobile, backend, front end, desktop, and including gaming. You can actually use, it's apparently going out of support at this point, but you can actually use JavaScript to write actual 3D rendering with something called Unity script that was released by the folks that do Unity 3D. So it's even taking over the gaming realm at this point, which to my mind is okay, if it takes off in gaming, it's over, right? If it's running video games front to back, it's done because they've consumed everything at that point from a marketing standpoint.
I just think it's too much like PHP or Perl in your description for my liking, but
Well, we've seen what happened to PHP and Perl, so who knows? Maybe this will be the moth to the flame, right? It will burn brightly for a few years, and then it will just totally burn the building down.
Yeah.
It remains to be seen. I think that with especially with the backing of people like GitHub and other organizations that are doing a lot to make JavaScript better. And quite frankly, some of the improvements that you see in ECMAScript 6 with the way that they're making JavaScript a little bit more like Java from the way that it actually is written, classes and things of that nature. It might make it more consumable in general, and as adoption kind of coalesces around JavaScript, it could be a good thing. Ultimately, if it gets more security eyes on it in terms of hardening and making sure that they're doing proper things with encryption, etc., it could be a good thing. In my mind, if we were to actually unify on one language that does everything sufficiently, might not be a bad idea from a longevity standpoint, right? Like at some point, of course, people will come up with crazy JavaScript frameworks to do new things, as is the problem that we face today. There's a new front end framework that seems to come out every single day,
right?
But adoption seems to be coalescing around really three: Angular, React, and Vue. So, I know we have just a couple more minutes for this segment. I actually wanted to cover just a few learning and tools this week, not as many as last week, unfortunately. The first one I'll actually go to, though, is number 3. It's called Gron, which, Paul, if you've ever, have you read Lord of the Rings?
No, I have not.
So, being the nerd that I am, to go along with the show,
don't pull my nerd card. Don't pull my nerd card.
Gron is the name of the battering ram that is used on the city of Gondor during the siege of Gondor. It's the giant wolf's head. It's actually displayed in Return of the King, I think, is the movie that it's in. So, but the actual project Gron, number 3 under Learning and Tools, is allowing you to make JSON objects or JavaScript object notation greppable, which for you, Paul, using grep and awk and set, I'm sure, is going to make those people's lives easier, that everything seems to be output to JSON and let somebody else handle it. This will actually now make it greppable, which is good because searching through JSON is just kind of a nightmare right now. So I wanted to call that out. The other one, and speaking of attack vectors through JavaScript, is Pwn.js, which is a browser exploitation library, which is number 2 under Learning Tools. So for those on the red team or on the attacker side, this is a way that you can actually package in CVE named vulnerabilities and exploits against the browser effectively. So now you can get someone to click on a malicious payload, it browses to a site, and then in effect allows you to leverage JavaScript to then exploit that device or exploit that vulnerability using JavaScript, which, I mean, we were talking about attack vectors in JavaScript. Here it is. It's one of those situations where it's now coming to life.
It reminded me of that site that I can't think of the URL, but it allows you to break out of like kiosk restrictions. So like if you're on a pen test and you found a kiosk and it was, locked down so that you couldn't, open up cmd.exe or really do anything, you could, if you get to a browser, you go to this site and it would essentially provide you with multiple techniques to get around the kiosk. That's kind of what this reminded me of.
Yeah, similar. And the other thing that I would call it similar to, perhaps not the same as, but similar to, is the idea of Metasploit, right? So having a framework through which you can actually add in exploitable code to then, exploit vulnerabilities. This is the same sort of idea, right? It's a framework around allowing you to leverage the browser as a point of contact that then turns JavaScript into the exploit. So same as what you have with Metasploit, where you take a Ruby package, you can then write out how the exploit should take place. And then Metasploit is kind of like the delivery mechanism, packages it all up and allows you to push it out. So same idea.
I like the subdomain discovery tool. We're actually talking about that this week on the network. And Carlos Perez did DNS enum a while back, and I didn't get a chance to see if he's been maintaining that. I know a lot of his code, I think, was also included in Metasploit, I want to say.
Yeah, I believe so too.
And this is a new tool for subdomain discovery. What's interesting is one of our sponsors, Domain Tools, has similar functionality, but they partner with a company that has sensors all around the internet that are logging all of the lookups, and Domain Tools has access to that. So from a passive DNS perspective, you can log into Domain Tools, and they will tell you about all of the observed, subdomain lookups, which I thought was really, really cool. Like an
Yeah.
awesome way of doing that, right? You don't have to brute force it, or hope that domain zone transfers are enabled, which usually they aren't today, although some people still do mess up in their configuration. So brute forcing is one method. I kind of like the passive approach. I think that's pretty cool.
And the passive approach is generally better for the defenders. In this case, Amass, which is the tool that we're talking about, number 1 under learning and tools, is similar to a tool called Sublister. And the idea is to do subdomain discovery. So people like myself or researchers that work on BugCrowd, what we do is we will end up saying, okay, this is an open scope program. Let's see what we can find from certificate authority registration, Bing, Baidu, Google Cache, etc., just to see what's out there. And then from there, you use other tools like Eyewitness and so forth to see what's actually alive at that point, which is a little bit different. But yeah, the passive discovery is a lot better because then you can actually say, yeah, no, that someone was looking it up, but it doesn't actually return anything, so therefore I don't have to bother with it, right? It's
because it can see the responses and determine whether it was actually associated with an IP address or not.
Right. Whereas these tools, they basically say, at one point this existed, but I don't know whether it's alive or not. You have to go to step 2 of testing all of them. Which the last one is an automation testing idea or concept. So Adam Reiser, I might be mispronouncing his name, was also speaking at Hackfest Canada last year, actually at the same time that I was. So I didn't get to see his talk in person, but it's using Selenium to actually automate some of your attack methodologies against different websites or web applications. So I linked to that under number 4 for learning and tools because I thought his talk was excellent, and I highly recommend people check it out. So
awesome.
With that, we will take a break. We will take a break and come back for the news.
Layered Insight is the industry's first embedded security approach for containers. Trusted by Global 1000 enterprises to secure their containerized applications, it's the only solution that requires no root privileges, has zero dependency on the underlying infrastructure, and is fully portable across any container environment. Unified DevOps and SecOps, enabling the rapid development of containerized applications without worrying about security. To learn more, please visit layeredinsight.com/ASW. Innovation's a funny thing, in a cosmic sort of way. While it drives your business forward, it also exposes new risks that can slow you down. As an IT or security professional, every day you need to know, are you vulnerable? Are you compromised? And finally, are you optimized to quickly spot and resolve issues to keep your operation humming? It's your responsibility to help the organization safely and reliably implement the latest connected technologies. So how can you outsmart this little paradox? Rapid7 solutions are powered by advanced analytics and an unmatched understanding of the attacker's mindset. Visit rapid7.com to learn more about how Rapid7 products transform data into action. Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome back, everyone, to Application Security Weekly. A couple of quick announcements for this segment as well. We've recently added the State of Security Education and Training webcast in conjunction with IT Pro TV and Roger Williams University to our content. So it's available on demand at securityweekly.com/on-demand. It's free for our Security Weekly listeners and subscribers. And be sure to just check out the State of Penetration Testing with Black Hills Information Security. The guys over at BHIS are incredible. So I would definitely recommend that one strongly. Two other announcements, actually, real quick. Bugcrowd is hiring. So check out bugcrowd.com/careers or email me hoodie@securityweekly.com. I can tell you more information on any positions you might be interested in. Lastly, if you're looking to hire either junior or senior penetration testing talent, let me know. The DEF CON 617 group meets the first Tuesday of every month in Boston. And so I've met a number of people there who are looking for some new opportunities, and I'd be happy to connect you if you're looking to hire. Again, hoodie@securityweekly.com. With that, let's go ahead and jump into the news for this week. So the one that I thought was the most hilarious, because earlier, Paul, you were talking about operating systems and having bash, is Debian has a CVE 2018-0492, where there's a race condition in beep that, if you can hit the race condition, allows you to get local privilege escalation. What do you think, Paul?
That's pretty
Beeping
awesome.
your computer for VESC. It's like, I know that, if you hold down a key for too long, your computer starts beeping at you, but privilege escalation with beep? What?
That's awesome. It's awesome. It's one of those binaries you could probably safely delete too. Right? Like,
I don't think that there's any mission critical. Well, you say that, Paul, but it could be one of those situations where your computer is, going to force shut down, and it needs to make sure, like, there's a logical check that beep takes place before you actually have the power off, kill command go through. So who knows? I don't know that I would recommend deleting it.
The beep functionality must also exist in the BIOS and or hardware-based firmware UEFI as well, right? Because it'll beep before the bootloader comes up and loads the kernel. So I don't know if the operating system command actually accesses it must access the hardware to make it beep, right? Because that sound has to come from the motherboard.
Right. So needless to say, Debian for old stable distribution, which is Jessie, it's been fixed in 1.3-3 Deb 8U1. And then for the stretch distribution, it's been patched in 1.3-4 Deb 9U1. So it is patched. Get used to the patchery so that your beep doesn't cause local priv-esc.
It's awesome.
I just thought that was hilarious. APFS encrypted plaintext passwords, story number 2 under the bugs, breaches, and more section. Apparently, High Sierra continues to have a treasure trove of really bad practices. So another more persistent macOS log file is storing plaintext passwords to system logs.
So this is another vulnerability in Apple's encrypted file system. And the implementation of it. You know
what has seemed to have happened, Paul, is you cover WordPress a lot, or at least you have in the past covered WordPress a lot on Paul's Security Weekly. I feel like on Application Security Weekly, almost every episode we have seen has had an Apple High Sierra vulnerability.
Right.
I just can't fathom this at this point. It's like, what is wrong with Apple? Needless to say, the original patch for the last APFS encryption vulnerability was supposed to be patched in 10.13.2. This is in the most recent patch, which I think is 10.13.3. And it actually has existed in terms of a vulnerability with entries dating back to original installs of High Sierra in November of 2017. WTF. This is the reasons I have not upgraded to High Sierra. They just keep piling on. Like, at this point, I am probably going to be waiting until the next major release, and then still be waiting like 6 months or more before I decide to install.
I mean,
you're not using too. Go ahead.
Well, one could speculate that something changed in Apple's software development process that has led to either a bunch of code not being checked for security vulnerabilities, or security vulnerabilities just being introduced and again not checking for those vulnerabilities in the SDLC, which is kind of concerning.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the other side of it too, though, that could be happening here, Paul, is that it could be a situation where people are now taking a harder look at macOS as opposed to, otherwise. And so now they're
True.
looking at High Sierra just because it's the latest, and so more things are popping out. It makes me wonder though, because Apple has a really good reputation of providing and making secure mobile devices. And I can't imagine that their operating system is really this bad, but I don't know. Maybe we should get Patrick Wardle on the show to talk about this. He has objectives-t.com, which he's pretty well known for some of the tools that he has built that are free and open source for securing macOS and, quite frankly, also finding vulnerabilities in macOS.
Yep.
So, Patrick, if you're listening, we want you on the show. Reach out. We will get you on for an interview. Moving on, Drupal, also all bad. A highly critical CMS bug has left over 1 million sites open to attack, affecting Drupal 6, 7, and 8, which effectively is sites running vulnerable versions of Drupal should be updated to 7.5.8, because in this case, it would allow for, let's see, what was it here? Social media has called this Drupal 2, and it allows for people to actually exploit multiple attack vectors. They haven't even specified which one, but apparently all bad with Drupal. I don't know, Paul, CMS, it sounds like this process is hard. I know that you run multiple websites. What do you think?
Your choices are kind of like pick your poison. And none of the CMS frameworks have a really stellar reputation for not containing security vulnerabilities. They also make it very easy to introduce vulnerabilities into the system as well. I don't know what the right answer for that is. A lot of them are, well, they're in the core code. A lot of them are in the plugin or add-on code, and there's just so many moving parts. It makes it a very difficult technology to apply security. And if we look back over time, there was movable type and, God forbid, Cold Fusion, and then Drupal and WordPress, and they've all, over the years, we've covered so many vulnerabilities in these frameworks that, if you're implementing them today, being agile in your deployment, and certainly having a DevOps process around them, I've come to discover is where I'm heading, and I think a lot of people should already be at that level when you're deploying a CMS. And we talked last week about WP Engine, right? And I think that you're going to choose a technology based on your needs, and you're going to apply security in that process. And I think that a DevOps style approach is absolutely needed, because you're going to need to push out changes, not just for functionality, but for security as well, like at a high rate. So, having that process built around your CMS where you can do 10 deploys a day totally makes sense. You don't want to be in a situation, whatever CMS you've chosen, where it takes 6 months to push out an update. That's going to lead to disaster, because there's always going to be new security vulnerabilities. And then, of course, it's the whole monitoring piece on top of that, which I've never found anything that I was really excited about for monitoring. There are some things for WordPress, that I'm looking into, but monitoring that ecosystem has always been challenging for me.
Yeah, and it's a situation now where hopefully being able to do things like containerizing some of these applications will at least give you a backstop against attacks, right? So maybe they do get into the CMS system. You have to still deal with potential client-side attacks against other users on your site.
Mm-hmm.
But to that end, at least you can perhaps harden it so that they don't get access to things like the database. Heaven forbid, right? So that was CVE 2018-7600. If you need more information on that. Also, I just wanted to cover in the last two in the bugs, breaches, and more section, which is first, I know that a few weeks ago we talked about how Microsoft had some patch issues related to what was Meltdown for Windows 7 x64 and Windows Server 2008 R2 x64 system. Looks like they've actually pushed that out as an update for CVE-2018-1038. So what the patch was, that was effectively supposed to patch Meltdown, ended up doing was it allowed for exploitation as just a matter of reading and writing already mapped processes in virtual memory. It allowed any process running on the system to read complete contents in memory. So effectively, the way that they patched Meltdown Inspector was, rather just than reading this cached memory section based on speculative execution, why don't we just let them read all memory, regardless of user privilege on the system? how do you mess up that badly?
I don't know.
Is my kind of question here.
Dude, it's just a hot mess. I mean, there's no better way to describe it than just a flaming hot mess with Spectre and Meltdown. And every week there's new information that comes out. I've lost track about what the original vulnerability was, what new vulnerabilities that the patches are introducing. And last night we covered certain Intel processors that won't get updates, and that was a mess as well, because it's not necessarily based on age. Like some of the older processors will get an update, and some that came after won't get an update. There's speculation that some of the processors weren't in widespread distribution, and it's not necessarily based on age, but based on deployment. So the whole thing is just a complete hot mess.
Yeah, in this case, it was a Swedish penetration tester, Ulf Frisk, who found the vulnerability. And he states, this made the page tables available to user mode code in every process. Like,
I know Microsoft, right up your alley, Keith, had a bug bounty for new speculative execution vulnerabilities. Microsoft has a bounty for $250,000, which, I don't know, in the scheme of things, that seems like one of the higher payouts for a bug, although you know better than anyone, right? But in my assessment, that was a pretty high payout. So Microsoft is certainly very interested in ensuring that these bugs are responsibly disclosed and fixed in their code. When it's their code that needs fixing.
Right. I don't know, and it makes me wonder if this would have qualified, right? Because it was actually a fix to a speculative execution bug that introduced effectively read-write any memory on the system bug that was in fact what the patch ended up being.
And I think Microsoft clarified that, and it was like 12 or 25,000 for those variations on attacks. They actually put that in their bug bounty as well. Brand new ones are the big bounty, and then kind of offshoots from existing attacks were a much lower amount.
Yeah, and quite frankly, all of those payment ranges are very high. I mean,
pretty high. Yeah, I say lower amount, like 25 grand, still pretty good, right?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, so most bug bounty programs, I think the top end for really critical, melting earth bugs are maybe at 10K for their application. But they're also not Microsoft, and they're not running most of the world's software.
Correct, yes.
That's an entirely different set of problems. Speaking of software, though, Paul, under the "if you build it, they will come" story number 1, there is it was just highlighted as a tweet out there that I saw, where 45 million downloads for a JavaScript function that someone had open sourced to determine if something is a number, which is already built-in functionality inside of JavaScript. Quite frankly, I think, Paul, this is how the world ends. I remember we had a story a few weeks ago about how someone re-registered a GitHub library after someone had then gone and deleted it in the Go package. It blows my mind. I mean, Paul, you've written a lot of software. Do you tend to look for libraries or functionality that are going to do something that the code can already do for you?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting scenario. And as much as we try and read the documentation for native function calls, in your searching, or maybe someone else, maybe before that functionality was included in the language, or the functionality was somewhat limited in, like, say, Python 2.7, and then you're going to Python 3, and what you need is in Python 3, but the 2.7 function was somehow limited, so I went off and got a third-party library to do that, and so I can see the situation happening, especially as different iterations of languages occur, and everyone just kind of falling back to what was public before. Maybe now the built-in function has more functionality, and I don't need that, but I'm still using this other third-party library.
And then all of the Stack Overflow suggestions point you to that third-party library, and then it ends up being the top search on Google, and then everybody just goes and downloads it. And then eventually, when that person deletes that library for some reason or another, like, the world goes to chaos.
Yeah, or that library has a vulnerability, which is why I like solutions, that look for vulnerabilities in your code as it's being developed and committed. And there's several vendors out there. I think we've got an interview with WhiteSource coming up on this show. And they're a great vendor in that space. So I'm looking forward to that interview. And there's lots of other vendors in that space. WhiteSource is really good, and actually some of my friends that work in the industry have kind of vouched for them and said, yeah, we use it, and it really helps us. So This is certainly a circumstance where that technology can help kind of get out ahead of the curve with vulnerable libraries.
Absolutely. And even more than that too, right? So like if someone has a vulnerable library of this and or deletes it, it causes a lot of chaos. And it makes me wonder, like, in my mind, this is what technical debt looks like.
Yeah.
Like this is an exact scenario of technical debt where it was paid off by the main language, but that we're also used to just charging it to our Stack Overflow card effectively, that we don't even bother looking for the next level down. So
yep.
Yeah, it's going to cause problems. Surprising no one, under story number 3 for the "If you build it, they will come," criminals are hijacking your computer to mine cryptocurrency. This is probably the most obvious headline that I think I've read ever. But the thing that I found interesting about this story was specifically Egyptian internet users who are accessing a porn site that I will remain nameless for now. It's in the story if you want to go read it. In recent years have found their computer slowing down, and it was speculated that it was because of ads. But in this case, it was actually the Egyptian government was secretly hijacking citizens' computers in mass for those that were going to these porn websites to mine cryptocurrency. I thought that was kind of interesting because it was quite, in this case, a government that was actually doing it, not even like a malicious actor.
Wait, like, there's porn. There's porn on the internet. Just news to me.
Who'd have thought, right?
Who'd have thought, right?
Well, so the other thing that I find interesting though is it was a government that was doing it, and I know that in the Middle East there are a number of laws depending on the country that you're in related to like unseemly content such as pornography, right? So it makes me wonder if rather than having it be a situation where those people are getting arrested, they said, well, why don't we just like turn this around and monetize by hijacking traffic?
Well, which, I think that that ties into your other story that you had in there about the state of Georgia.
Oh man, yeah, that's a whole nother problem as well.
Right?
So under the food for thought section.
Speaking of legislation.
Yeah, this one is real bad. Basically, Georgia passed anti-information security legislation that, despite the community that's in Georgia, so specifically Atlanta is kind of a hotbed of security talent. The actual legislation that's passed, according to EFF, states that basically, if you're looking for vulnerabilities in a non-destructive way, even if you've ethically reported them, and especially if you've ethically reported them, you're suddenly a criminal if the bill actually is signed by the governor of the state. To go on, though, a lecturer at Kennesaw State University, Andy Green, was quoted as saying that he's putting his research on hold because college undergrad students may be open to criminal penalties, and it's basically giving him pause. I can't believe it. We live in a day and age where ethical disclosure is being a kind of a normalized thing. I mean, I work for a company that promotes it. And now we have a state who was just hit by a huge ransomware attack.
And this is their reaction.
The backlash is incredible. Like, I can't even. I don't have enough evens at this point.
Well, I think it's somewhat of an atypical response, that we're seeing a trend. Certainly, Facebook cracking down on ads as they were, reportedly influencing the election. YouTube cracking down on certain types of content, based on shootings and events that have happened, and people blaming technology, right? And then companies and governments reacting to get rid of that technology. It's always been my fear that legislation like this would crop up in our field and say that hacking tools are bad, that looking for vulnerabilities are bad, and we have seen some of that in the past, and it's really kind of frightening.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations that I don't know whether or not the governor has actually signed it into law. I haven't seen anything to that effect, and I'm hoping that they haven't. But to that end, it's weird to me because the DOJ and so many other federal entities have been somewhat permissive of ethical disclosure of vulnerabilities, whether it's through a bug bounty program or disclosing it to the company just as a kind of goodwill disclosure, right? And to take this approach, especially after it might have been a year or two ago now, where doing research against things like cars, right? That was recently permitted. I'm trying to remember if it was the FTC or I can't remember who it was now, but there was a government agency that basically said you're allowed to do research on these things now for a 3-year window pending,
Yes.
renewal.
Yes.
But to have a state come back and say, yeah, no research, never, and if you do it, you'll be arrested.
I think that my hope is that it doesn't pass, and I think one of those deciding factors are going to be the universities and industry companies that are in the state that are impacted by this, and also not them just complaining loudly. If it does pass, they likely will leave, right? And new companies will not set up shop in Georgia because of this law. So it effectively is going to hit their bottom line in a big way. And we can only hope that the governor is going to figure that out rather quickly, if they haven't already, and not sign this into law. That's my hope, being optimistic.
I agree. And, unfortunately, I think, though, that especially with the situation as it stands in Atlanta recently, my gut feeling is that the government of the state of Georgia will probably be, a penny wise and a dollar short by passing it, then ultimately losing out on all the industry moving away. But I did want to kind of wrap up a little bit here, Paul, with a story about resilience. Tell me about the NASA Voyager 1 spacecraft.
Yeah, I thought this was a really awesome story, not really security related, but essentially in 1977, NASA launched Voyager 1. And for 37 years, they hadn't heard from this spacecraft. And so they got a bunch of engineers together at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and analyzed the assembly code and figured out a way to activate the backup thrusters so that it could turn towards Earth and send communications. And they actually got communications back. I just thought that was really cool. The thrusters were still functional after 37 years without use. So talk about resiliency, right? And the software, they said, was coded in outdated assembler language. And they made sure that they could safely test those thrusters. What I really loved about this article is one of the geekiest terms that I've ever seen in an article, I think. So they say Voyager 1's extended mission is expected to continue until around 2025, when its radioisotope thermoelectric generators will no longer supply enough electric power to operate its scientific instruments. That's radioisotope thermoelectric generators. I love that. I got to work that into something because I just think that's the coolest term ever.
That is, so you're pulling out your nerd card now. But to that end, yeah, I mean, like a story of resilient development, right? Like, here's two things that they did, right? Two things that they did that were awesome is they went back and they reviewed the code. And the second thing is they tested to see if it would work before they actually used it in production. Who'd have thought, right? Like, genius right there. But at the same time, I just thought that this was a cool story to include because I don't know that anyone builds their code today to be as resilient as this sort of thing. And quite frankly, I feel like there's every opportunity to do so, especially with the modern DevOps processes that we have. So I would encourage everyone to build their own NASA Voyager 1, or at least the equivalent of in their code as they continue
and
to
have
develop.
Cool acronyms like TCM, which is Trajectory Correction Maneuver. That's awesome too. I loved all the terminology.
Movies.
Yeah, I loved all the terminology in this article. It was so nerdy. It was awesome.
Yeah, and to that end as well, I wanted to point out just a couple stories before we wrap up. Story number 7 under Food for Thought is a kind of a longer form story with some really neat graphics around the ideas of running less software, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's, use what you need, live off the land, as it were. So that was a cool story to check out. Also, Apple's going to be replacing its chips with its own chips in 2020, replacing Intel, which I thought was good. Story number 2 under Food for Thought. Lastly, though, I've left 2 cartoons from probably my favorite webcomic today, which is Commit Strip. Stories number 8 and 9. The last one specifically on how full stack development came to be.
It's pretty
so
funny.
With that, yeah, thank you everyone for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to git commit and stay classy.